Hey there, welcome to One Take, powered by backers.
Right? No judging. No judging.
And the millennials are really changing that.
Is charm. No.
All success begins with desire.
I feel like I'm on fire right now.
OMG, baby, tell them.
Hey there, welcome to One Take, powered by backers. I'm Justin Fox. I am joined here by my guest today, Howard Rosen. Howard, thank you very much for joining me.
My absolute pleasure.
Does anyone ever say, Howard, you doing? No?
It's starting now, always.
Always, yeah. That's Howard, you doing? All right. Anyways, I'll do a quick intro. So you have an MBA, 20 years in your first career producing film and TV. Then you developed an idea for a communication platform to engage patients and providers in healthcare, in which you were a solopreneur, then an entrepreneur, then the CEO or founder and CEO of the company that built the platform. You invented that, which you have now been awarded 8 patents. 3 years ago, you stepped down to create a new consultancy, being solutions architects specializing in digital transformation, incorporating AI and RPA, which is robotic process automation. I assume you're working with founders and startups and all of the fun stuff. So, yes. And what do you do on your spare time, if you have any? No, I'm
that
kidding.
Was a mouthful.
Yeah. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I mean, excited to be here.
Yeah, it's exciting to have you. We've had to bounce back a couple times to get this done. So I'm excited to actually have it happen. So tell us a little bit about who is Howard Rosen. Give us a quick Cole's notes of kind of what got you to be you kind of thing. Then we'll kind of talk a little bit about what you're up to. Give us a little bit about the personal of Howard Rosen.
That's really interesting. Well, you give. Thank you so much for that overview. Sort of, I guess it really sort of encapsulated. Perhaps and there are stories involved at each level.
Of course.
But for me, I grew up in Montreal.
Okay.
And moved to Toronto.
Good old Toronto.
Yeah, it was Toronto. And guess when I was about 16, 17?
Okay.
And that's where I started the first career, as you saw, in film and television. The reality is, I guess, an MBA, I went to school. I have to admit, I didn't attend all the classes.
Right.
Particularly one that said you don't go from graduation to running a Fortune 500 company.
Right. Yeah. There's a few stops in the way, right?
I wasn't aware.
It doesn't happen just like overnight. Yeah.
I was 21. Who knew?
I think we all at 21 were in that same mindset. Exactly. Like it's going to happen overnight, and 20 years later, you're still waiting for that overnight success. But it's all about the journey too. I mean, we have the conversations, right? So, cool. So where did you do your MBA at? In Toronto?
It was Schulich. Yeah, York.
Schulich.
University.
Okay, York. Okay.
It was York. Now it's Schulich in terms of Schulich School of Business.
Right. Okay. And so were you up at the campus there?
As the main campus.
City back.
Yeah.
So that was
back when it was north of the city and there wasn't anything around it.
Right. I mean, I'm from Toronto as well. I've watched that evolve. I mean, the subway is it's there now, I think.
Oh, it's past there.
It's gone. Yeah.
It goes far past up to Vaughan.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I haven't ridden that subway in a while, but so I remember them building it. It was. Yeah, I mean, I remember even sort of some of the residences going up and some of the, outside of the stadium, that whole physical, the sort of
whole
sports complex. Yeah, the stadium, the arenas, the big sports complex, the stadium, all that stuff, right? So it's definitely evolved over the years, over the past, 20, 30, 40 years for sure. So you do your MBA at York, that propels you into sort of the healthcare space, building out a communications platform, or no?
Well, the reality was a bit of that gap, which is 20 years of doing film and television.
Okay.
Where literally I was, an MBA, said, oh crap, I need a job.
Right.
And, so the choice was, okay, do these programs working for a bank, or maybe there's something else I can do? So literally I was going through classified ads in the newspaper for people looking for full-time staff. And I'd say, look, forget full-time. I'll just do a consulting job for you.
Right.
And I got a lot of gigs that way. One of them was a guy who said, film producer looking for a finance person. So I gave him the same speech. What do you need a finance person? I'll give you a consulting. What do you need to do? And I'll give you a consulting gig. And it was basically the proposition was I was tired of producing one picture every 3 years. I want to produce 3 pictures a year.
Okay.
And being a good MBA, I knew widgets. So So I said, well, film widgets gotta be the same thing, like you're working in a factory. So I gave him a business plan to say, this is how you do 3 films a year. He gave me the check and I was just leaving the room. He said, do you want to do this with me? And I
Okay.
said, that's kind of cool. What'll happen? He said, I don't know, but I don't think you'll get hurt. And literally that's what launched me being film and television. I started off financing them. I made the mistake of saying, look, if I understood the creative better, maybe I can make better deals. And then I just went to the dark side on the creative side of production.
Interesting.
And over 20 years did about $100 million worth of production.
Wow. So what kind of any films that we would be familiar
film
with,
and TV,
or
television
or TV shows?
I did
I mean,
TV,
obviously
so
growing up,
TV,
yeah.
kids shows, Sharon Lois and Bram's Elephant Show, you may be
Okay.
familiar with.
Yeah.
In terms of film, well, you're out west now, so there's a film called The Gray Fox that actually took place out there.
Okay.
A small film called My American Cousin that took place in the Okanagan Valley.
Okay.
And a few others in this small little thing called RoboCop I was involved in.
Oh yeah, that one.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Thing like that.
Yeah, I think they're just rebooting that now, or they're trying to reboot it.
Again.
Did they do it? They did it for the third
Yeah.
time. Okay,
This will be the third time. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. It's funny. We actually have a film. So with backers, I mean, we're a funding portal, right? So we facilitate private companies raising capital, selling equity, basically, or shares to the general public, right? So they can raise up to $1.5 million. We actually have a private film, indie film right now called Fresh Meat. They're raising capital on the platform. So it's cool to see that side. I mean, we're kind of the helping fund we're sort of the modern financiers of ingenuity and innovation, right? And so,
well, that's very cool. In those days, I had to raise the money myself.
I was gonna ask. How walk through that process, because that would be an interesting. I mean, we're talking what sort of time frame? When you talk Sharon Lois and Bram, that's 80s, late 80s,
so all
90s kind of thing.
The film stuff is 80s, 90s.
80s, 90s. Okay.
The film and TV is 80s, 90s.
And so 80s, 90s. I mean, we're talking pre-internet. Pre almost computers. In the 80s potentially, right?
I had literal arguments and fights when I suggested using a computer for accounting.
Okay.
And on a picture that we did called One Magic Christmas, which was our film with Disney, I forced our team to use computers to do the accounting.
Wow.
Disney said, you can't do that. You can't use computers to do accounting. You need people.
Right.
So we literally had 2 computer systems. We had my computerized accounting system, and we had their accounting people at the same time doing the math and all the accounting on it. Because they were saying at that time that can't be done.
Can't be done. Wow. That's so
not to age me.
I was gonna say, to those watching, many out there can't imagine that time, a time when there was no computers. But so I'm actually interested. That's for sure. And I mean, I was joking around with someone the other day about sort of there's a generation that I fall in, it's called Xennial. It's like X millennial. It's like a Gen X millennial, sort of late 70s, born late 70s, early 80s, where we were like, analog and as a child and digital as an adult, right? So, grew up without a computer, or very limited access to one. And then kind of in our late teens, early 20s, we're introduced to the, computers and the internet and stuff. I'm interested though, because we work with a lot of startups, and I'd love to hear your take on what's that?
That's all I've been as a startup.
Right. Okay. So, but I'd love to hear your take on how you raised funds for those projects prior to social media, prior to, I mean, obviously a thing like backers is light years ahead, but what was the grassroots way of going out and raising capital? Was it, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but just walk us through a day in the life of a fundraiser, if you will, for a movie project in the 80s and 90s.
In those early days, you had financing vehicles. You had sort of programs that the federal government had.
Okay.
So there was a base of people, and you had pockets of businesses that all they did was help raise financing.
Okay. So sort of like grants type thing, or they actually?
No, it was tax credits.
Tax credits. Okay.
Tax deals. So you have a whole slew of films made in Canada that were tax films.
Right. Okay.
And sadly, if you saw them, you could recognize it because they're slapdash. Here's a quick turnaround on some money.
Right. But okay. So they were trying to get the money and just throw whatever they could at it. Okay. Yeah.
But there were a lot of pictures that were made. They're actually really very good that use those vehicles. So you had formalized companies that raised money based on that with their group of shareholders.
Right.
But there's costs associated with that. There's other approaches which were that I did, which was get partners with a studio for using One Magic Christmas as an example. I got Disney as a partner.
Okay.
To provide financing it. They were not the only partner. In those days, I was actually brought a broadcaster. So it was CBC, if I remember. No, it wasn't CBC. No, it was actually an independent, which is a whole other story.
Right.
Unless you're really interested in sort of the nuts and bolts of something.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of like what.
So that's again. So example of that. There was a
Yeah.
funding of ability through the federal government.
Yeah.
That to what was called, what's now called Telefilm Canada.
Right.
That basically said if you had a broadcaster associated with a project, they will put up to 1/3 of the production budget.
Okay.
At that time, no limits.
Really? Okay.
And so I had to trigger that. So I needed a broadcaster, but it's CTV, and I had Disney on the other side. So I had 2/3 from Disney. I knew I could get 1/3 from the federal government if I had the
Right.
broadcaster. CBC turned it down.
Okay.
CTV turned it down. And it was a fairly mainstream project with Disney and recognizable stars, but they turned it down for whatever reason. And so being very desolate at the time, going, how do I get this? I've got all the money, but I can't trigger it. It was literally went through the regulations, and it talked about having a broadcaster and a broadcast license. And it defined the broadcast license as being from a bona fide national broadcaster or a bona fide independent.
Okay. So you could kind of go the independent route then.
So I had a friend out in Edmonton at the station, and at the Edmonton, and Allard owned it. Alarcom owned it at the time. Tony Allard and his brother. He said, guys, would you be interested in a Disney film?
Okay.
And having the world premiere of the Disney film on your little channel,
Right.
ahead of CTV, ABC, NBC, everybody else.
Yeah.
They said, well, we don't have the money to do this. Like, it's way too expensive.
You just needed their name though, or you just needed
I just needed your regular broadcast license that's regular for you guys, which was $10,000. So for $10,000, I triggered 3.5 out of Telefilm and 9.5 out of Disney.
Wow.
And financed that film.
Wow.
Which later became the $1.98 broadcast license, which later I got raked over the coals for having found a loophole. But
oh yeah, okay.
But
hey, and how are those guys
legitimate.
still? Are those guys still in business? The brothers, the ones out east that you said
you know what? I haven't spoken to them in years. I think Alarcom still owns the stations, but
okay. But that was, I mean, good story for them, right? Great story for local story. Yeah.
And literally, especially independent films, was doing that same kind of thing, sort of going, there's traditional routes, and then sort of sitting down going, what's a less than traditional route?
Right.
Where's the pockets of money, and how do you thread them together?
Yeah. No, definitely. Interesting. So, okay. And then, so that's actually kind of an interesting way. You've got the tax side, you've got, then obviously you're bringing in the production side with the Disney sort of thing, and then you bring in the distributors in this small entity. So what was there any ever a day, and I know that the film specifically that we're working with, Fresh Meat, and I know they this is sort of their second film, so they were able to raise a little bit of money for the first one, kind of, I think, bootstrapped it primarily. It's now in theaters actually in the US, so they've got a bit of notoriety. This next one, they've been able to raise a bit of capital sort of privately. Obviously now they're using backers to kind of backfill the majority of that. They do have some help from Telefilm, which is kind of that, the Canadian, so they are a Canadian entity. But was there ever a time where you had to go out and find private investors or financiers? Like
we have one of the other films went private, that actually the Gray Fox was private.
Okay.
Completely private.
Good name though. Good name. I'm almost a little bit of a Gray Fox myself as well.
It's actually cool. It's actually, it's
depends on where you look at it.
But Bill Maher, you actually find it online. It's actually a really neat film. It's
I'll look it up.
It's a true story based on the first train robbery that occurred in Vancouver.
Okay.
Outside of Vancouver.
Interesting. I'll have to look it up with my namesake in it, and for
Bill
sure.
Miner is the actual fellow. Miner is who it's about.
Okay, interesting. So films.
But yes, we actually used investor groups as well.
Yeah, and would that go into like sort of like pre sort of angels and you're just going out looking for high net worth individuals that are
Yeah.
ready to throw some money at it. So very,
Exactly.
very not kind of structured, but you're out there kind of networking and finding people that are
Exactly.
interested. And at that point, interested in the arts that are more,
Yeah.
because the money necessarily it's not necessarily a huge return on investment all the time, right? It'd often be a break even or not necessarily a huge
Exactly.
money maker, right?
Well, because
Or sometimes.
frankly, because those are tax deals, so
Okay.
they made their money on the write-off. So they basically had 100% write-off in the first year
Right.
of their investment, or 2
Right.
years. But as I
Right.
said, they're also very sophisticated syndicates that were around in those days.
Right. Okay.
Or
So
law
they
firms
kind of knew
that
what they
headed
were
it
looking
up.
for.
Yeah. They had to structure it, and the structuring got more and more sophisticated over the years to deal with all the various vagrancies of how all these things work, and limited partnerships, and you got very big, very expensive. A lot of accounting groups and legal groups made a lot of money,
Right.
a lot more than the producers.
Right.
of the
Right.
film.
Yeah. Well, but they were the artists. The artists always
Yeah.
starve, right?
Yeah. And of course, and that naturally led to my work in healthcare.
So let's transition into that. And obviously, I mean, you're with Nova, right? That's kind of
Yeah,
where you're at
Nova
now,
Insights.
but that's kind of flowed from a couple other things. So
Yeah.
walk us through how you got into the healthcare program or communications platform. Sorry. What was that transition and how did that come about?
The transition was, and again, context is really important here. So this was 2004, 2005. So I
Okay.
guess 20 odd years ago.
Right.
Where I expanded my production company from traditional film and television to go into education and training.
Okay.
So I did a lot of things, like Toronto Stock Exchange was a client, for example. My first healthcare client was GlaxoSmithKline.
Okay.
And they
GSK.
wanted to have, basically it was just creating an interactive product, a DVD on type 2 diabetes, just to sort of learn about, to teach about type 2 diabetes.
Right.
I had to beg them to make it interactive, because they didn't understand what interactive was, because they didn't understand a DVD could be interactive in those days. Like, it was a novel concept.
Right.
So it got me interactive. It was about type 2. In doing so, I learned about diabetes. I didn't know very much about it.
Right.
I learned how pervasive it was and how pervasive it was going to be. And that was 95% preventable.
Right.
And being a father at that stage of 4 young kids, I was going, man, this is going to be really expensive now, but it's be extremely expensive in the future. And my kids' taxes are going to be out of this world to pay for healthcare for
Right.
something that's preventable. So what's being done? Lots of things being done. Nobody was using it. Lots of solutions. 18% of people were managing with their solutions. So at that stage, being a card-carrying, arrogant producer, I just went, all you got to do is come up with a lifestyle-oriented solution. People will be more engaged to manage their diabetes, and they'll take care of it.
Right.
And I went, okay, well, that took about 10 minutes. I wonder what else I can do today. And
Yeah,
then
yeah,
think
yeah.
about it. 6 months later, I was working with Universal McCann in New York, the advertising agency, on a promotion campaign for a brand new cell phone. Again, age-wise, I think you'll remember this. It was called the Motorola StarTAC phone, the first
StarTAC
phone.
Motorola. Yeah.
Yeah, so I did a promotional on that.
Okay.
And so in doing that, now for those of you who are a little younger, this was 2005, and the engineers were telling me, Guy, you're not going to believe this, but sometime in the future, there's going to be programs on the phone.
Right.
And we're going, no, you can't put a program on a phone. A phone's a phone. And they
Right.
said, and the first program's going to be you can tell the weather. We're going, how can you tell the weather with a phone? Don't be so ridiculous. And we laughed, and that was it. That evening, about 3 o'clock in the morning, working on both projects, I kind of went, maybe these cell phone devices will be that lifestyle device to help manage diseases.
Right. Okay.
And that started
That's the light bulb that kind of
that was the light bulb. And
Yeah.
to your questions and all those things. So I spent about a year researching that whole area, trying to figure out what is this remote patient monitoring stuff and everything else, and came across some thought leaders and brought them on board, and basically went out of the blue, just say, look, you don't know me from Adam, but I've got this idea. I want to know if there's anything to it or not. And the main objective was for these people who became advisors was to convince me not to do it, to say, look, it's already being done. It's obvious. Don't worry. Don't think about it. It's already happening. And they all came back and said, we've got bad news. Nobody's doing this.
Right. So
And
that means somebody should be doing it. Well, to them,
Exactly.
it means it can't be done. In your mind, it was,
Yeah.
why don't we do it kind of thing? Is that?
And let me figure this out. And the
Yeah.
reality is I treated this like I treated an independent film. In
Right.
terms of financing, bringing on people and everybody else, I treat it as I was a producer. In this case, I was producing a communication platform.
Okay.
So in
Interesting.
terms of bootstrapping it all, I did it for a fraction of the cost that a lot of people
Thought
have
of,
done it for,
right.
just because I treat it like an independent film.
Right.
And
And
very
so
long
you're
story
able to raise
short,
some capital and bring it to life?
it's all bootstrapped
Yeah.
to build
Okay.
it and everything else, and brought it to life, and is still doing both at that time. But what ended up happening was one of my first trials with this, I got a call from one of the groups we're working with and said, just called to let you know you saved a life tonight,
Wow.
and hung up the phone. And I called him up and I swore at him like a sailor for about a half an hour. He goes, "What are you so mad about? Like, your technology helped save somebody." I said, "Yeah, I know. It helped save it's unbelievable. I knew there was a business good here. I was hoping there might be a social good, but I never expected something that can actually help anybody.
Right.
Because now that's helped somebody, how can I not try to help somebody else? Like, if it's
Right.
got that ability, I got to do it again." And literally, I left the film business to build this to see how much more I could
So
do.
was that LifeWire? Is that what
That's
you're referring?
LifeWire.
LifeWire, right? Okay.
LifeWire. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So I mean that's unreal. Like you were sort of at the forefront of medical technology and kind of lifestyle, yeah, everything kind of coming together, right? In
Yeah.
technology and healthcare and sort of building that out. And I mean now
Well,
everything's obviously phone based. I mean we've
yeah,
all got our
exactly.
smartphones and people nowadays can't even imagine life without a a
Oh,
smartphone,
exactly.
right?
Well, the funny thing is, just in terms of to your point, because the investment side of you is, so trying to get the patent on this, the patent office said, "Okay, you're unique. It's novel, but you're crazy. We don't see how this remotely, basically sort of saying." So they kept on turning it down.
Oh, really?
And
Okay.
then the iPhone came out,
Okay.
and they went, "Oh yeah, well, this is obvious now. Your
Right.
idea."
Right. Once
And
it's
they went, "Yeah,
obvious.
but dudes, remember, for 3 years I was crazy."
Yeah. Yeah.
And literally that's how we got it approved.
Yeah. You're crazy until you make it happen, and then you're a
Yeah.
genius,
Yeah.
right?
So,
Exactly.
it actually
So
took 8 years to get the first
to
patent.
get from that, yeah, I mean that's because that was like you said, early 2000s. I mean,
2005.
yeah, I mean that's that, yeah, like you said, smart tech, Motorola, the flip phones, you've got a little tiny little screen. There's
Oh
not
yeah.
much you can do on
Nothing
it.
there.
Maybe they added games. It wasn't really until I guess the Palm Pilot was kind of like the non-phone, but had some
Yeah.
apps, and then the iPhone was a mix
That made
of
the
the
big change.
amalgamation
Yeah.
of the two, right?
Exactly.
Where people actually wanted to have it because they needed the phone and it came with all the other accessories. Arguably now the
Choice.
phone's the last part that they use.
Yeah.
Just to kind of quickly touch on, you're a mentor with the forum. I think that's how we initially
Yeah.
had connected. I
So
was
a mentor,
sort of going
yes,
through, how did give us a little background on the forum and how that works and what sort of what you do with the forum, because for those that aren't aware of the forum, just to kind of quickly, it's a I guess it's kind of like well, it's for women, self-identified women entrepreneurs, access to resources and community they need to thrive in business. That's kind of the overarching of what the forum is. So give us a little background on what you do with the forum as a mentor there.
Well, really, and just to that, throughout my entire career, I've been mentoring people, in part
Right.
because I never had a mentor.
Right.
And kind of went, "Ooh, it'd been nice to sort of run ideas by somebody who kind of knew what I was going through."
Yeah.
So through my life, I've always mentored people. And right now, yes, I'm a mentor of the forum. I'm actually a mentor with an executive with Global Affairs Canada for working with companies who want to go into other countries.
Okay.
Senior fellow at Columbia University, working with them, with groups in the States. And I work with actually the Hatchery at the University of Toronto as a mentor for engineering students with new ideas.
Yeah, I just see that actually. I did see the other ones. I'm kind of looking at your
And I
bio as
mentioned
well.
that
Yeah.
just because it really is something I believe in
Okay.
helping with the forum, which is the women. Over my career, a lot of women I've found have been given short shrift, which was, aside from being dumb, it's actually dumb business, because I found having that additional perspective makes a big difference in business.
For sure.
And frankly, want to be able to encourage that. So when I was offered an opportunity to become a mentor in the forum, I jumped on it. When I was asked to be there, which is to work with, as I said, self-identified women, but really with ideas no different than a traditional mentoring,
Yeah.
But it's just be able to work with women who are particularly, they're supported through the mentorship, and it's sponsored through Scotiabank. To be able to just help them, again, business ideas, business issues, how do you navigate and provide a different perspective? Because
Yes.
you need that, well, you need that in terms of success, you need to have that large perspective.
Yeah.
And not be afraid of perspective and people disagreeing with you.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I mean, so as a mentor, that's kind of interesting. I'll kind of touch on that. I mean, obviously you mentor and the female aspect and the women. I saw a stat actually, which I used to talk about this stat 5 years ago when we sort of launched backers. 1% or less than 1% of VC funding went to Black or African American entrepreneurs. So this is a US centric. And I think it was less than that went to female. And I heard this sort of iteration of this stat for 2023, and it was like less than 2% of VC funding went to female or women founders, which is still great. Like when you think of all the evolution of what's happening, and you would think that number would be climbing, it's still,
it should be
embarrassingly low, right? In the space. So, and that's just funding. That's one aspect of it. Obviously, there's a lot of other aspects to it, but
it's a key part of
it's
it.
a key part of entrepreneurship. So, touching on your mentorship aspect, do you have any like tips, or maybe if you want to give like 3 pieces of advice? I mean, they're always good for a quick soundbite as far as like 3 pieces of advice that maybe Howard Rosen would give to a aspiring entrepreneur or somebody that's currently, maybe floundering or has recently failed or maybe is struggling. Like what would you say? Because I mean, there are a lot, the ones that are succeeding, they don't need the advice. They've already, no, I'm just kidding, but they've already made it. For the ones that are struggling, what would you say, I guess, or thinking of starting up?
I guess there's 3 elements at the top of my head. First one is really be clear as to what your vision is.
Right.
Really be clear what it is you want to do, and not just, out there, but really be very clear. This is the problem I'm trying to solve.
Right.
So be really, really, really clear what the problem is you're solving. The second part, however, is make sure that's a problem your intended customer wants to solve.
I feel like I've said this before. Exactly. It's a problem that needs solving, that they want solved, right?
But that they want solved. And also, it's not only that, the caveat that is that it's ranked at the either first or second as being needed to solve. If it's ranked, it wants to solve it, but it's number 10 in the priorities, you got to go away from that. It's got to be first or second.
It has to be a priority that they have, right?
And ultimately, you got to talk to the intended customer. You can't do it in isolation, sitting in your basement going, I got this idea, or I've worked in this industry, this is a problem. You got to actually talk to the decision makers who are dealing with that problem to make sure that's actually a problem they want solved.
Yeah, definitely.
Because it could be a problem, needs solving, but it's not ranked in a priority. I got bigger problems to deal with.
100%. And I kind of add on to that they're willing to pay for the solution.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Like that's kind of the caveat too, right? It's a priority, and they need, at the very least want to pay to solve it, right? But they need to. Yeah, they need for sure.
It's the need versus want. I deal with my sales teams all the time. Well, they want and they should. So it doesn't mean anything. It's they need. They have to identify it's actually their business will not survive unless this is solved.
Right, exactly.
Into. The second piece of advice is actually 2 and 3 tie together, is when you first come up with your idea and as you go about, because people say no, you shouldn't let that bother you. Be clear into your vision, but sometimes a lot of people say no because they just don't know.
Yeah, they don't understand. Yeah.
So be clear in that. But the caveat to that one is to understand that do talk to advisors and do get additional perspective on it. Because yes, you want to be clear in the vision and not be afraid of no, but you've also got to be open to, in terms of if you're hearing your advice in terms of the pivot, be open to understanding you need to refine or pivot that idea.
Yeah. I literally had the person, Adam was on yesterday. The exact same point he made. His way of saying was, even if your best friend or your mom or your dad or parents or whatever say that it's a stupid idea, if you see it and you have that vision, they just don't understand it. Now, the caveat, like you said, is that yes, maybe you do need to, with new information, make changes or adapt, right? But as long as you see that through, you can't be kind of swayed or pushed from
Right
your
away.
conviction, right? No, I mean,
And-
that's great advice for sure.
And number three, if
Yeah.
you made the mistake of asking me for three,
Yeah, no.
is when you're talking to prospective customers or anybody about what you're doing,
Yeah,
they don't know what they don't know. So when you ask them a question, the context is really important because they don't know. When you say, I got this gadget that actually, it looks like this mouse, but when you push this button, it turns on your TV. What do
yeah.
you think of that? They may go, well, that's cool, but they may not know, well,
Why?
there's a remote control that can do that already.
Yeah, yeah,
Or you can do
yeah.
it from your phone already. It's like, it's just because that sounds a good idea. If there's no context and because they don't know that, because a lot of times people talk to you based on what they've read online or someone's told them about. So they understand this, but they don't understand anything underneath. They don't
Yeah.
understand what options are, anything else. They know what the buzzword of the day is.
Well, that's kind of like smartphones, right? I mean, if you ask somebody I mean, again, it's funny that this is almost word for word the conversation I had yesterday was sort of like the concept of they don't know what they don't know. And I use the analogy, and I don't know, and I haven't looked it up yet. Again, so I'm probably bastardizing it a little bit, but the whole Henry Ford, if I asked them if what they wanted, they would have said more horses, right? But in reality, it was going to bring them the car, right? So they don't know. They've never experienced it, so they don't know that they need the car, right? Or a smartphone or whatever. You know, in our case, you know, I was joking, like the average person has never invested in a private company because they've never had the opportunity to. They've never known that that was an option, right? Where you know, now, and sort of there's things like that, right? And so similar to you were saying, the when you were bringing the patent idea for the early detection of the diabetes, or sort of the monitoring things of that nature, right? And then, you know, 3 years later when smartphones or iPhone comes out, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it now. It's like, but to get them to conceptualize it, you know, 3-4 years, 6 years prior, it was very difficult, right? So yeah, that's very interesting. So I don't know, any final words? I really appreciate you joining me. I know we've kind of bounced around a couple times, but love to talk offline and sort of get your take on some things. But so we should maybe set up a time to do that. But where can people find you? I guess is probably the
best thing is just to, well, certainly I'm on LinkedIn,
of course,
which is Howard Rosen. I think it's 129. I think is the full name.
Okay. Oh, like your URL. Yeah. It's Howard Rosen 129 is your LinkedIn URL. Yeah.
Or at hrosen at novapix.com. So it's HROSEN at novapix, NOVAPIX.com.
Okay, perfect. And yeah, appreciate you. And we should definitely talk. I'd love to. It'd be interesting to bring you in to mentor some of our entrepreneurs as well. I mean, obviously,
I'd be very happy.
You've got great insights. Yeah, and sort of we can discuss that. So again, Howard, appreciate you. Thank you very much for joining me on the show. Again, it's One Take, powered by Backers. I'm Justin Fox. Howard Rosen's probably this way or this way. I don't know which way he will be on the end recording, but he's somewhere around me. Howard, thanks again for joining me. Cheers.
Oh, my pleasure. Take care.
Everyone else, I'll see you again very soon. Hey there, welcome to One Take, powered by Backers.
Right? No judging. No judging.
The millennials are really changing that.
Is charm. No.
All success begins with desire.
I feel like I'm on fire right now.
OMG, baby.